Alright, let's talk about gathering. Some people dread the activity, others love it. I personally used to gather so much that it funded my first few legendaries. About 2 years ago, I had no clue how I would make gold, so I figured I would run around and gather everything on site. I've learned a lot during these past 2 years, and now I want to share this information with all of you. I'll leave a link in the pinned comment to any third-party tool I'll be referring to, as well as vendors, map locations, and so on. I won't repeat this throughout the video because it'd get real stale real fast. Before I get to the equipment, which might get more technical than you would expect, let's first talk about what to gather. If you have no clue where to go or what to do, I would recommend checking out GW2 Efficiency's gathering page or the Fast Farming's node page. Both give you great starting points, and as always, they list the expected gold you're gonna make. In addition to both websites, I would recommend installing BlishHut and enabling the pathing module. Techit has made gathering routes for about every valuable material in the game, and Fast Farming added a few extra routes of their own with their own pack. After a few days or weeks of following those routes, you'll notice that certain maps feature certain materials. If you want more Makuma lilies, you'll be spending more time in Heart of Thorns and Draconis Mons. If you need more iron, you'll be spending more time in the Dredge Hunt Glyphs. Next up are the gathering tools and glyphs. If you have a set of infinite gathering tools, make sure you equip them. If you don't have any, don't worry. You can actually buy tools for karma from different vendors, and in the main hubs you can even buy limited use tools with some of the best glyph effects in the game. If you're in the market for a set of unbreakable tools, you need to know that not all of them are made equal. Some of them come with special features, and the animation speed of a few of them is either faster or slower than the average tool. Before I dive into the specific tools, there's something important to know about buying gathering tools and glyphs. You can buy an unused version of the glyphs on the trading post, but they're often overpriced. Let's take Glyph of Volatility as an example. One sells for 365 gold if you're going for a buy order, or 399 if you want to instantly purchase it. Let's take that lowest amount and convert it to gems. If you're converting 365 gold to gems, you get around 1030 gems. And a full set of infinite volatile magic gathering tools will cost you 2700 gems on the Gemstore whenever they're available. So if you were to convert the price of 3 of the volatile glyphs to gems, you'd have 3090 gems. With those, you can buy the infinite volatile gathering tools, which will include 3 of the glyphs, and have a little over 300 gems to spend on something else. There are 3 types of glyphs. You have those that will grant you extra resources, such as volatile or unbound magic, watchworks, sprockets, and so on. You can check on Fast Farming for the current best glyph to slot in. If you don't have the one that will yield the highest profit, don't feel forced to have to purchase that one though. Just pick the next one on the list you do have. A second type of glyph is those that will save you time. Glyph of Reaping will gather everything in a radius around you, Glyph of Industry will help you gather in about half the time, and there are a few others. Whether these are more valuable than the first type will depend on yourself. If you despise gathering, but you still want to go for a quick gathering session of tightly packed nodes, Reaping will save you some time. I wouldn't particularly recommend buying the Glyph of Industry, for the simple reason that faster attack speed will also affect your gathering speed. So instead, try to incorporate quickness in your build, as this will let you gather faster and still slot in one of the glyphs of the first category. If you don't have access to quickness in your build, you can buy a cup of light roasted coffee, which will grant you quickness whenever you dismount on a 30-second ICD. A final thing that affects gathering speed are some classes' traits, such as the Warrior's Dual Wield or the Mesmer's Malicious Sorcery trait. While not as fast as quickness, they will still speed up your gathering animation. A third set of glyphs, and one that warrants its own video in the future, are those that transform resources. In the footage you'll often see me gathering Mithril and Elder Wood, but getting Orichalcum and Ancient Wood instead. That's because I'm using the Glyph of Alchemy, which upgrades the materials I gather. Do note that there is a cap of 150 for Mithril and Elder Wood converted per day. The counterpart of this glyph is the Glyph of the Crucible, which would downgrade the materials you're gathering. So if you're doing a tour of rich mithril veins, using that glyph will give you platinum and increase the gold you're getting. A fun quirk about the Glyph of the Crucible is that it can also downgrade tier 7 materials, such as Imperial Fragments, Dragonite Ore and Bloodstone Dust, into either Mithril Ore or Elder Wood. I wouldn't particularly recommend this, but it's worth knowing. As mentioned, not every infinite gathering tool is built the same. You can actually greatly speed up your farming session by knowing which skin to use. And you can transform the skin of your gathering tools through the wardrobe just like you would your normal gear, by the way. The fastest sickles to use are the Consortium Harvesting Sickle and the Fused Molten Sickle. They have the shortest casting time, which can even be cancelled about halfway through and you'll still get the materials. When it comes to logging and mining tools, this video might get a bit controversial. The most repeated advice is to buy the Unbound Magic gathering tools for their logging axe and mining pick. This advice is repeated for good reason, but you'll notice I use neither. The Unbound Magic logging pulse has the fastest animation of all documented logging tools. Mind you, a lot of the new tools were added to the game at a later date and not all of their speeds have been documented yet. I didn't want to buy all the Unbound tools simply for the logging pulse. Instead, I used the Frostwasp logging tool for the longest time, which has the exact same casting time, but adds a 360 millisecond aftercast. I hate cancelling aftercasts, so I just suck it up and spend a little longer gathering. But if you're an expert at cancelling animations, you could buy that tool for 1000 gems instead of spending 2700 on a pack of infinite tools. This tool used to come without a glyph, but I noticed ArenaNet is updating some of the older tools to come with a selectable glyph instead. So make sure you check whether it comes with one or not when buying this in the future, because the 1000 gems might still be a bad deal. Keen observers will notice I'm not using the Frostwasp either though. Instead, I use the Glacial Logging tool. This is one of the tools with a funny quirk, as its gathering animation is reported to actually be more heavily affected by quickness than any of the other logging tools. Remember this getting controversial? I still actually need to measure the milliseconds of each of the gathering tools, so I might be still better off using the Frostwasp, but more on that later. Let's talk about the mining picks first. The Unbound Magic Mining Beam is the fastest mining tool, but only if you cancel the aftercast. If you don't cancel the aftercast, it's actually slower than the Volatile Magic Mining tool. And once again, you might notice I'm using neither of those two mining picks. That's because the Choya mining tool and the Skyscale Hatchlings mining tool can gather 5 times instead of the usual 3 per animation. Given that I tend to gather rich nodes rather frequently, I only have to cast twice instead of 3 times by using one of these. The reason I'm choosing the Skyscale over the Choya tools is because the Skyscale's animation is once again more heavily impacted by quickness than the Choya tool. I hope this solves a lot of questions people might have about what tool to buy or what skin to use. One of my projects for 2024 is to actually save up so much gold to convert to gems and buy every single infinite gathering tool skin I'm currently missing. I want to calculate all of their animation speeds with and without quickness, as well as document their quirks. Because right now, we're all still relying on Mars Edge's research that was published in 2018, and a lot has changed to the game since then. That covers gathering routes and tools. Let's talk about builds next. In general, any open world build listed on Meta Battle will do just fine if your main focus is gathering. The first thing you should consider is adding some quickness either through a utility skill or by selecting a specific trait. It's worth checking out their raids or fractal section as well for quickness DPS builds. And if you have a diviner set, it might be worth equipping over a berserker set for the extra boon duration. If you play a spec with no access to quickness, consider buying or crafting cups of light roasted coffee. They're less than 1 silver each on the trading post, and they're even cheaper to craft yourself. And if you're playing a warrior or a mesmer, you might want to use dual wield or malicious sorcery to get a baseline 20% boost to your gathering animation. Please note that these effects don't stack with quickness. With the introduction of relics in the Secrets of the Obscure expansion, we now also have access to the Relic of Speed. This relic will grant you quickness every time you use a skill that is categorized as a well. So if you miss how the old Scrapper could gather in the open world, use that relic and it's as if ArenaNet never changed how Scrappers provide quickness. Same thing goes with Spectre Wells, Necromancer Wells and so on. If some jokester decides to pump up the prices of these relics, which currently cost 9 to 11 gold on the trading post, don't buy them outright. If you still have some of those free relic chests, you can get a free account-bound copy from the survival containers. And if that's not an option, you can actually craft them yourself by either having tailoring, leatherworking or armor smithing level to 400. A second consideration, but only for a select few classes, is adding stealth to your build. Thieves, engineers and mesmers can avoid combat by using some of their utility skills, or in the case of Deadeye, by trading silent scope and dodging with a rifle equipped. The final consideration when it comes to your build is just pure offensive power. Play a build that will burst down enemies in a few seconds. If an enemy is guarding a node, just blast them into oblivion and you can gather in peace. You'll notice I do this on the Untamed builds I'm playing in the video, and I'm using a combination of Quickening Zephyr and cups of light roasted coffee to gather with quickness most of the time. This brings me to my final and favorite part of the video, buffs and boosters. You can grab a guild gathering boost if you have the bartender in your guild hall unlocked. If you don't have guild, shout around in Lion's Arch and someone will surely invite you to theirs. If you have a ton of guild commendations, which you can gain through participating in guild missions, you can buy 3 gathering banners for 2 commendations and 10 silver. And finally, we have the item booster, which brings me to my favorite item yet again, the candy corn gobbler. If you watch my videos consistently, I'm so sorry to subject you to the same speech over and over again. But if you like farming, nothing can beat the value of the candy corn gobbler. You don't need to buy item boosters for gems or laurels or any other currency if you have the gobbler. Usually ArenaNet will sell the gobbler on the Gemstore during Halloween, which should be in a couple of weeks. There's always a chance they won't sell it, but if they do, it's one of the best value items to buy in my opinion. It only costs 300 gems, and if you want more information on the gobbler or how you can get those gems without spending real money, check out my video in the pinned comment. That's most of it covered. I will still make a few very specific videos about some of the glyphs, and hopefully sometime next year a video about all of the animation speeds of the different infinite tools. And probably anything else I can think of I want to share with all of you. If you have any other comments or questions, feel free to ask them down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It doesn't increase your gathering luck, but it sure does make me happy.